All right, welcome everybody to our adult education class at Potomac Presbyterian Church. We are glad to be able to meet in this way, both in person and online. And as we get started, we're just going to ground ourselves in a word of prayer. Let's pray. Good and gracious God, we gather on this cold morning, recognizing that you are the warmth within, that you are the one who animates our spirits and draws us together in this community and draws us toward you. I pray that as we learn and think more deeply about contemplative prayer and spirituality, that you would open our hearts and minds to your teaching, to your love,
Hi, sweetie.
to your grace. Anoint Winston with your Holy Spirit as he teaches and leads and guides and shapes our course time today. We pray in Christ's name. Amen.
Yeah.
Welcome, Hougans. Okay, this morning we welcome once again Winston Charles into our circle. You may recall in October, we had a few technical difficulties, and Winston has graciously agreed to try again to be our leader and teach us about contemplative prayer and wisdom. I was introduced to Winston Charles through the Chilean program that I'm participating in for clergy spiritual deepening. He is one of the co-teachers of that class. And this is sort of a two-part class. We'll meet today to learn from Winston about contemplative spirituality and prayer. And then next Sunday, the listening group that has agreed to walk this journey with me by listening for the Spirit as I go through this program, the listening group and I will meet together to share how we listen for the Spirit using a Quaker, we're reading a Quaker book together by Thomas Kelly, A Testament of Devotion. That's his name, right? Thomas Kelly, yeah. And so we'll share a little bit about how we listen and how, and follow up on the course today that Winston is leading us in. And maybe, Winston, I'll let you sort of introduce yourself a little bit as you go through. Is that enough of a bio?
Yes, that's fine.
Yeah. So I'm going to turn it over to you now. Thank you so much for being here with us. Stephanie is monitoring the chat and the sort of online comments, and she will help us if there are questions or draw attention to that for those who want to comment online. All right. Thank you.
Well, great. Thank you, Emily. And indeed, it's so good to be back with Potomac Presbyterian with all of you. I wish I was sitting in one of those chairs down there so that we could be in person. But this is the way we're living at this time, and I think it's wonderful that we have this hybrid system so that more people can be a part of it. As Emily said, we had a little technical difficulty the last time, and I will say it was all on my end. It was nothing on Potomac Presbyterian's end, and Emily and Stephanie just stepped right in and carried on, even when I could not get back on. It was sort of a reboot, and I was thinking about that. I say, much of life is rebooting. So that was just part of life. Now is a good time to talk about contemplative prayer because we are leaning towards Lent, about 10 days away. And perhaps something that resonates with you during this time, you will want to carry into Lent and to go deeper. Or not just this time, but next week when the listening group presents as well. So may we all have a meaningful and beautiful Lent leading up to the celebration of Easter. So I'm coming from Raleigh, North Carolina. I am an Episcopal priest now for some 48 years. That's hard to believe. But my last active charge with the church was Christ Church in Raleigh. And I was the rector there, the head pastor there for 15 plus years. And it was a wonderful time. I mean, we had some challenges over some of the issues that are still challenging us today. But all in all, it was a great congregation, and we just had a lot of celebration together and journeyed together in a wonderful way. So I retired in 2009 after 30 plus years in congregational ministry. And I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I knew that it was time to do something different. The one thing I knew I wanted to do was to accompany people on their spiritual journeys. And so that's the way I found the Chilean Institute for Spiritual Formation, which for over 50 years now has been reclaiming the ancient Christian tradition of contemplative prayer and spirituality, contemplative living and leadership. So I took a course on spiritual guidance, and I also took a second course on leading contemplative prayer groups and retreats. And then I was on the board, became president of the board. So about, the last 10 or 11 years, I've been very involved with Chilean, and I am so grateful for it. The very first course I took, I knew I was home because something was just resonating so powerfully within me. It brought up a memory from early childhood when I was 10 years old. I grew up in a small town in South Carolina, and at summer we were all at the pool, of course. I was with my 10-year-old buddies, and we were having a rowdy time. But I found myself often then where I would roll up in a ball in the water and blow off enough oxygen, air, so that I'd break the surface tension of the water, but not go all the way down. So I was just there where the water was holding me. And of course, when you're underwater, even though there's a lot of ruckus outside, when you're underwater, it's silent. And I would do that over and over again, and I had no idea why that was. Well, here late in life, I realized what that was. That was a very early experience of contemplative presence, and it was life-giving and healing. So I grew up in a small church in Bennettsville, Episcopal Church, but I never heard anything about contemplative prayer. Maybe your experience is the same. Now, why is that? Well, I just want to give two reasons why that is. Because contemplative prayer goes all the way back to Jesus, and it's been passed down since that time. But we didn't hear about that in Bennettsville, South Carolina. So one reason is in the 4th century, Constantine, as many of us know, became the first Christian emperor of the Roman Empire. Now, there was some good in that because the Christians then were not persecuted the way they had been for 400 years. But there were some negative parts of that too, because the melding of the Christian faith and the Roman Empire meant that there were competing agendas, and the Roman Empire wanted to have a unified one understanding of what the Christian faith was. So there was an emphasis on doctrine and dogma that had not been there before. Whereas before then, there was a lot of variety that was available in how we understood what Jesus was about and who Jesus was. So there was a group of faithful Christians who felt like their religion had been co-opted by the Roman Empire, and they went into the wilderness, particularly the wilderness of North Africa, and established a community of retreatants, of monks in North Africa, among other places. And I want to get back to that in just a moment. But the other thing that happened that prevented us from knowing about contemplative prayer was in the West, the mind became so very important. And the epitome of that probably was the Enlightenment in the 18th century, when the mind took over dominance of what is truth. And the body and the heart was sort of put in second place, and they became suspect. Message. Can you still hear me? Yes.
Can anyone hear? Can they hear?
No.
Oh, there you are.
Okay. So, so this is epitomized with the saying of Descartes. Perhaps you can fill in this blank. I blank, therefore I am. I think, therefore I am. So the mind became the most important. Of course, the mind is a great and marvelous thing. Just think about the Webb space telescope that is going out into space at this point. But it's not the whole person. And contemplative spirituality reclaims not only the mind, but the heart and the body as the whole person that is held by God, and that we can know the whole good news of the gospel through that way. So here I want to share, I'm going to share a screen here of some of the key dynamics of contemplative prayer and contemplative living. Dynamics, but these are some of the key ones. Contemplative prayer, contemplative spirituality, contemplative living and leadership involves recognizing the mutual indwelling of our human, unique spirit with the divine spirit deep within our spiritual heart. Silence and stillness are a central dynamic for this opening of our hearts to the heart of God. There is an emphasis on three-centered knowing and living. So we can't really know and live, especially to know and know God and to live out of that divine spirit with our mind alone. But we must be engaged by the mind and the heart and the body. And the spiritual heart is a place of mutual indwelling where this three-centered knowing and discerning takes place, and where we are being present with the divine presence. Contemplative prayer practices, of which there are many, ground the soul and enable us better to hold that connection with the divine deep within us. And our deepening of our own presence with God, the beloved, and with the wholeness of who we are is not just for ourselves, but it contributes to the healing of the world by embodying the heavenly virtues, heavenly energies into this reality of the earth. So that sort of gives you just a little taste of what we're talking about when we talk about contemplative spirituality, contemplative prayer, contemplative living, contemplative leadership. I would like to go to one of these in order to talk more about it, and that is to the place of holy silence, sacred stillness in this whole process of contemplative prayer. This is why, as Jesus was preparing for his ministry, his calling, he retreated to the desert. Now, I don't know whether y'all have this hymn in your hymnal or not, but in the Episcopal hymnal, one of the traditional hymns for Lent is this, one of the refrains. 40 days and 40 nights, thou wast fasting in the wild. 40 days and 40 nights, tempted and yet undefiled. All of these words from the 19th century focus Jesus's time in the wilderness on the way he preserved his purity, tempted and yet undefiled. Like the desert elders of the 4th century who followed in the way of Jesus, I imagine this time in the wilderness in a different way. More one of entering deeply into the holy silence, being one with creation, listening deeply to the Spirit, discerning what the next best steps on his journey might be, learning how and strengthening his ability to live from this deeper place. So that the desert time was not merely a moral accomplishment, but more a season of spiritual formation and grounding through silence and stillness. So holy silence and sacred stillness is one example of how the contemplative way is a complement to our culture. Well, actually, sometimes it's countercultural, because all of our lives, all too often, are filled to overflowing with activities and goals and objectives, with music and talk radio and noise of all kinds. But now we want to lean into the richness of holy silence and sacred stillness to inform and to form our souls, following in the way of Jesus, as he did not only during those 40 days in the wilderness, but throughout his earthly life. And in addition to all of these external noises, the mind, that marvelous mind, is often in high gear with a lot of internal chatter that must be softened in order for us to listen deeply and to hear what the Spirit is inviting. We are so used to all of this noise that for some, silence and stillness can be threatening, or at least difficult, maybe even scary at times. You want me to do what? To sit in silence for 20 minutes doing nothing? It just sounds, to those who have not experienced the richness of that silence, ridiculous. Nonetheless, the way of silence and stillness as spiritual practice can be such a powerful opening to the mystery of who we are called to be, what we are called to do. But this cannot be known, of course, as I said before, by the mind alone. It cannot ring true just by someone like me, whom you do not know very well, standing up here and saying it. The truth of this deeper grounding must connect with the truth of who you are, and the truth of who we fully are, our authentic being, our God-created essence deep within. There has to be, in order for this to make sense, there has to be an inner resonance that is felt and sensed, an interior yes. It's sort of like going back and my thinking about that 10-year-old boy floating in the silence under the water. Yes, there's something powerful about that, forming. When I was in seminary back in the 1970s, one of my professors dismissed mystery by saying, mysticism begins with mist and ends with schism and has I, the egoic I, in the middle. Well, now, that is a perfect misunderstanding when understanding is sought only by the mind. The best definition of mystery is that mystery is not something that cannot be understood. Rather, it is something that is infinitely understandable. Infinitely understandable. In other words, there's always more, always deeper levels of understanding in the beautiful mysteries of the Holy One. This has been one of the great joys of retirement for me, to realize there's always more to know, more to experience, more to understand, deeper experiences with people and with the Holy One. It's all about love, of course, a divine love whose life-giving powers are never exhausted, never. Since all is love, there's no fear, for perfect love casts out fear. Thomas Merton was one of the great Christian contemplatives of the 20th century who helped to reclaim contemplative prayer and living. And he composed a short volume of sayings from the desert elders of the 4th century. It's called The Wisdom of the Desert. And one of my favorites has to do with silence and stillness. So the monks of North Africa desert lived in community, but most of the time they were by themselves, and they lived in cells, oftentimes dug into the cliffside. And so the context of this little story is that a young monk is coming to an elder for direction, for spiritual counsel, for a good word on which he can meditate for his own spiritual deepening. And this is the short story from Wisdom of the Desert. A certain brother, the young monk, a certain brother went to Abbot Moses in No. Okay. Now? Yes? Okay. A certain monk went to Abbot Moses in Skeet and asked him for a good word. And the elder said to him, "Go sit in your cell, and your cell will teach you everything." Every time I read that, I imagine that young monk saying, "What? You have got to be kidding me. What kind of answer is that? Go into my cell and my cell will teach you everything?" The equivalent would be for us to hear, "Go into silence and silence will teach you everything." What? Of course, this holy silence and sacred stillness that we go into is not just any silence or stillness. Now I'm going to try to share another screen here. This holy silence and sacred stillness that we're invited into is going into the presence of the Holy One with an open heart and mind. It is intentionally stopping external activity, slowing down. It is intentionally disengaging from the interior chatter of the mind. It is being simply present in the body with no expectation of a spiritual experience, a good result. It is simply resting in God, trusting in the slow work of God to open us to that deeper ground that is firm and fertile. It is deep listening. As the contemplatives of old said, listening with the ears of the heart, that is the spiritual heart. It is entering into that mystery that is infinitely understandable, one layer at a time. Now, one day, not too long ago, I went out our front door here in Raleigh, and I saw on our yard next to the road this large, bright orange, diamond-shaped sign in our front yard, and it read in large letters, "Be prepared to stop." Immediately, I said to myself, I have got to have a picture of that. Because that is exactly what contemplative spirituality calls us to do. Be prepared to stop. So now, I'm going to invite you to stop. I'm going to invite you into a contemplative prayer practice that is simply to stop in the holy silence and sacred stillness together. It's sort of like swimming. You cannot really understand swimming unless you get in the pool. So we cannot comprehend contemplative presence by the mind alone. The body and the heart as well have to be engaged and involved in slowing down and opening to the present. So I'm going to combine this simply being in the great silence with another contemplative spiritual practice, that of chanting. Now, chanting is a wonderful spiritual practice, contemplative spiritual practice, because it involves the mind and the heart and the body all at once. So I'm going to chant a phrase from Psalm 46, "Be still and know that I am God." And this will lead us into 5 minutes of silence together. Now, a general session of silence is 20 minutes, but I think 5 minutes is going to be good for us this morning in our limited time. You will no doubt during this 5 minutes experience your mind taking you off to some far off place by giving you one commentary after another, pulling you away from simple presence with the divine presence. Well, don't worry about this, because it's just part of the contemplative prayer. Noticing it and returning to simple presence is all about contemplative prayer and contemplative living. So when, not if, but when this happens, simply without any judgment at all, return to just simply resting in God and being present with God, with the Spirit, with the Beloved, with the Holy One. Simple presence. That is all. Letting go of all expectations of success, letting go of any judgment of failure. Simply be present with the holy presence. As Julian of Norwich, a 14th, 15th century British mystic, said, the best prayer is to rest in the goodness of God. So with these 5 minutes, we're just going to rest in the goodness of God. And I'll ring the bell for our practice to begin. And then I'm going to chant 3 times this chant. Actually, the words themselves of the chant help you to let go, because they are, be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am. Be still and know. Be still, be. So just let that chant bring you into this letting go and simply being present to the presence of the Holy One. And after singing this chant, we'll have 5 minutes of silence, stillness, both alone and together. Alone in the loving presence of the beloved, together as a community of prayer held by the sacred silence. So now take just a little time to settle down, get comfortable in your chair. Just notice the rhythm of your breathing, not doing any kind of special breathing, just that we breathe in and out, in and out. This is body consciousness. We can't actually feel the beating of our heart, but the rhythm of our breathing and the beating of our heart are 2 innate rhythms of our bodies, and they are really connected, the heart and the lungs. Notice our feet planted on the floor. And then I'm going to invite you to close your eyes or simply relax your eyes and gently look to the floor before you. There can be a lot of stress behind the eyes. If you notice that, just sort of let that go and be present in the moment, simply resting in God. So I'm going to ring the bell and begin the chant. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am. Be still and know. Be still and be. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am. Be still and know. Be still and be. 5 minutes of silence. Be still and know that I am God. Well, thank you for entering into the holy silence and sacred stillness together. I'm going to just pause there for before going on to another part of contemplative spirituality and try to respond and to listen to any comments or questions or wonderings that arose for you. I think Stephanie is going to help us with the people who are online. I think I see a question coming.
I got that phrase in my head one time after my husband died in the summer. I was there on my bed doing some homework for a Bible study I was in, and that phrase came to me: be still and know that I am God. Of course, I didn't respond with quiet and with contemplation. Instead, I got up and ran around to find out what he wanted me to do. And I really, really expended a lot of energy in that direction. And he ended up showing me exactly where I used to work. And that was okay. And that was okay. And I went home and that was fine. That was my experience with that phrase. And so I'm surprised to hear it again. I really am.
Thank you for that. What a gift that was at that moment. That was just exactly what you needed to hear. So
I wish I had just fallen into contemplation at that point.
Well,
I had three children and they were in school and I was waiting for them to come home. And I really didn't have time to take a nap. I wish I had.
Well, it's never too late to fall into contemplation with that phrase. You can use it now.
I will.
I think there someone that was present in the room that had a question.
Yeah, Beth has a question.
What was that?
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Just barely, but go ahead. I'll try to hear it.
Okay. My question is concerning the contemplative, the silence that we just went through, and your prior discussion. To what degree, like being in a surroundings, like for example, out in the middle of nature, on top of a mountain, or in a valley with a stream going by you, to what degree does that aid in the contemplative prayer silence if you just find yourself in that surrounding, as opposed to a room? Even though there's silence in this room, I can understand that. But I'm curious as to your view about being in a certain place, in a certain location, with a certain surroundings that represents God's creation around you, to the degree that that aids in the contemplative or meditative thought process that we're bringing our minds and hearts to.
Thank you for that beautiful question. And well, first of all, I think entering into contemplative silence can happen anywhere at any time. And it part of what we're about is how do we strengthen that ability for us to notice when we're distracted and to go into that silence. Now, second of all, being connected with creation is one of the most powerful ways that can invite us into this, the mind and the feeling heart and the body, into this opening to the presence of the Creator, of the divine, of the Holy One, of Christ present in us and in creation. I know another very early experience of mine of contemplative spirituality that I had no idea that's what it was. And just it was happening at Philmont Scout Ranch when we hiked way up on the top of the mountain. I turned around and the beauty of the Southwest desert just stretched out forever. And I was just speechless by that. It was just stunning. And I know a lot of people have had that about the ocean and about the mountains and even little things. I mean, right now, my Daphne is blooming. And just to look at that Daphne and to smell it is a deep connection with creation and brings me into a very important place. So, one of the great. Okay. Well, keep getting cut off with the microphone, but anyway, one of the great teachers in all of that is the power of creation is Mary Oliver's poetry. If you don't know that, it's well worth searching out. Thank you for that question. Those were two great questions. So let me go on to say just a few more words before our time runs out. And one of the things I want to say is about. Oh, okay.
I have one more question.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Now, my question is, what about in your silence, your mind keep wandering, not concentrating on God and nature? How do you train yourself so that you don't think about anything but you think about God?
Emily, could you repeat that question for me?
How do you train your mind when it keeps wandering? Train it to go back to God and creation.
Oh.
Because the mind just keeps going in every other direction other than God and creation. And are there ways or aids to help get it focused on God?
Yes, thank you for that. Thank you for that question. So this is true for God and creation, but it's also true for any time that we are seeking to do this type of praying. So we settle into the silence, and unavoidably, our mind takes over, and it takes us over, out there. We're worried about work or worried about something of the future or regret the past or whatever it is. And what we do at that point is, first of all, simply to notice it, to notice that we are not being present in the moment, present with the divine presence and without judgment. It's not a judging thing. It's just a simple noticing. And then to just ever so gently bring ourselves back into this sacred stillness and open our heart to the heart of God. And the centering prayer practice, Thomas Keating, who established that, was famous for it, has this practice of having a sacred word. Like my sacred word is open. So if I notice that my mind is distracted, I will say open, and open stands for this little phrase: my intent is to consent to the presence of God, presence and action of God within. So instead of saying that whole sentence, which you can say also, I can just say open, and it stands for my intent is to consent to the presence and action of God within. And that brings it in. And the other thing that I will say is, a lot of times a thought like that or an emotion will have a hook in our body somewhere. So if we are worried about something, maybe it's hooked right behind our eyes with our worry. or we are sad about something. Maybe it's around our heart that we feel a heaviness. And if we can notice where that thought or emotion seems to be hooked and concentrate on just gently, ever so gently, just relaxing that part of the body, a lot of times that thought or that emotion which has hijacked us because we want to just simply be present for this dedicated time of prayer, that emotion or thought will just sort of dissipate or move away and become less powerful. So, and the final thing I'll say about that is, as I said, that is just part of the centering prayer practice itself. Because what's happening when you do that is that when we do that, we are strengthening, like an exercise program, we are strengthening our ability to notice more quickly when we are less than who we want to be. We're distracted. We're caught up in some kind of emotion or thought commentary, to notice it more quickly and to let that go and to come back into a deeper place in us so that we can let go of reactivity and respond, from our hearts, from our spiritual hearts, from our mind and feeling heart and body all working together. So if we're in a relationship and something is just driving us crazy, we can notice that, maybe feel even where that's in our body, breathe through that, let that go, and then respond with gratitude, compassion, humility, whatever the Spirit seems to be inviting.
I noticed that the music that you refer to is medieval chanting, and you yourself did a chant to show us how. What about Southern Baptist singing? What about the good gospel hymns of the church? Can you not find the same peace and release with Abide With Me and any one of the traditional hymns? Why do you have to go back to medieval chanting, which seems very unusual for a lot of us?
Yeah. Well, thank you. First of all, it's not medieval chanting. It's modern. I mean, it comes out of this century, but it is related to medieval chanting. And secondly, I mean, all of us have been moved by hymns, and they are very important to our being, to helping us to connect with that deeper connection within us. And I guess the chanting has sort of made a real comeback, not just in the church, but in the whole movement of contemplative spirituality, because it's very simple, and the repetitiveness of it, repetitions, helps us to let go of things and to lead into the silence. So I think there's a place for that is a complement to the wonderful hymns that we sing as a congregation or even by ourselves, and if we've sung them, for decades, and they have so much meaning for us, and they can also lead us into that place of silence and stillness. So,
thank you.
Yes. There is a book written by an African-American woman called Joy Unbounded, I think it is. But she is in a way raising the same question and responding to it that you just raised. Is contemplative spirituality restricted to silence, or can we experience it in a more joyful way? Tilden Edwards, that founded the Chilean Institute, said we can drink the living water of contemplative spirituality straight or effervescent. So I think it's not an either or thing.
Mm-hmm. Because you see a room singing Just As I Am over and over again, as they do at certain Bible calls in the South. And that brings the same sense that.
Let me just say just a couple of words as our time gets close to finishing. I've always been moved by this phrase, these verses from 1 Thessalonians. And it's in the 12th chapter, 15 through 18. See that none of you repays evil for evil, but always seeks to do the good to one another and to all. Rejoice always. Pray without ceasing. Give thanks in all circumstances. For this is the will of God in Christ Jesus for you. Now, all of those things are, in a way, difficult to do, but they are possible when we live from that deeper place. The one that engaged me the most over the years is pray without ceasing. And I wondered, well, how do we do that? And there is a tradition of praying the Jesus prayer without ceasing, repeating it over and over. And the simplest form of that is, Jesus, have mercy on me. And there's some people can just say that over and over underneath everything they're doing and everything they're saying, and it grounds them. But that has never worked for me. But when I think about contemplative spirituality, contemplative living, contemplative praying, the whole of life becomes a prayer, because we're trying to live not from a place of reactivity, but from a deeper place where our own unique, precious human spirit is joined with the spirit of the divine, the spirit of Christ. Another place in the epistles it says, put on the mind of Christ. That's exactly what we're doing. So as we're doing that, even if we don't do it perfectly, as we're trying to do that, that is praying without ceasing. So that the whole of life becomes that prayer that is the intent is to consent to the presence and action of the divine within and to live out of that place. And the last thing that I want to say is that what we're doing is not for us alone. How many times have we prayed the words that thy will may be done on earth as it is in heaven? That is our calling. And a way to understand that is just as Jesus embodied that heavenly presence into the reality of this earth, so are we called to embody the heavenly virtues, the heavenly energies into our hearts and into our very actions. And by doing that, we bring them into the reality of the earth, so that our prayer, our actions, our living is not just for us alone, but it's for the world, even the cosmos. And that is a way of our putting our lives into that broader context that God invites us to do. So that takes looking at our whole life as prayer, and contemplative prayer and contemplative spirituality is one way that gives us the pathway of doing that. Not perfectly, of course, but in our own way, in our own unique calling, and being the unique and precious person that we are created to be and we are when we live out of that deeper reality. So I am so appreciative of having time with you. And as I said to begin with, maybe there's something that resonated deeply with you as having validity and authenticity for your life. And you might want to consider how you will take that into Lent and live with that and go deeper in an understanding of what that is about. So
many thanks for your time and sharing your wisdom, Winston. Grateful, very grateful for your being here with us and giving us this food for thought, the idea of praying without ceasing, the idea of taking this into our sacred rest that we will be exploring in Lent. This will continue next Sunday. We're going to continue this conversation with the listening group, and we'll be here again in hybrid fashion, sharing a little bit about the way that we are seeking to listen for the Spirit as I'm going through this deepening, this clergy spiritual deepening class. So we'll go with that. We will say many thanks and we'll go into worship. So blessings on the day, everybody.
thank you all. Thank you all.